Cultured meat promises to disrupt the entire global meat market, but there are many hurdles to overcome before it will be widely available to consumers. However, the conventional egg and dairy industry does not have this luxury time buffer. This industry is already circling the drain without even recognizing it. And there is one particular technology at the very core of the ridiculously efficient, sustainable, cheap, and healthy proteins that will entirely replace conventional eggs and dairy within just a couple of years. Let's get into it. Hello world! This is the Impact Investing Show, where we think and learn about how to save the world and improve the lives of all conscious creatures by acting today and investing into the future. I'm Lennart Schelter, welcome to the show. So today we're going to talk about the global egg and dairy industry and how it will become obsolete in just a couple of years. This is the third video I did on the conventional animal products markets. You can check out my videos on the global meat market and the global seafood market linked up here. So let's get right into it. In this chart you can see the global egg production in million tons from 1961 to 2018. In 2019, the world produced around 82 million tons of eggs. That is an increase of more than 100% since the 1990s. It's also more than 10 kilograms for every person on Earth, or 22 pounds in stupid units. Here you can see it differentiated across certain regions, and you can see, unsurprisingly, China is the main producer with 661 billion eggs produced in 2019. And the second place goes to the USA with 113 billion eggs. For comparison, China currently has around 1.4 billion people, so you can calculate how many eggs per person they produce. Africa, on the other hand, has a population of around 1 billion people, but only accounts for 3.7% of global egg output for the entire continent. Europe has a very similar population to all of Africa, but it is accountable for 17% of global egg production. This chart shows the milk production in million tons from 1961 to 2018. The world produced around 906 million tons in 2020. That's a 2% increase from 2019 and a doubling from just 50 years ago. The world produced around 116 liters or 25 gallons in stupid units per person on Earth. Here you can again see it differentiated across the regions, and Asia of course is leading with 350 tons produced, Europe follows with 240 tons and the USA with 100 tons of milk produced per year. Highest growth as always happens in Asia, and as a fun fact, India has around 56 million milk cows. That's about 1 cow per every 25 people. So now let's check out the actual per capita consumption. Keep in mind that the production of eggs is around 10 kilograms per person per year in the global average. Now the per capita consumption, as shown here, for the world average is around 9 kilograms per person per year. That is equivalent to 150 eggs per year, so about 1 whole egg every other day. But when you split that up onto the continents, you can see that people in Africa consume only around 2.6 kilograms of eggs per year, whereas in North America, people consume a whopping 14.4 kilograms of eggs every year on average. It is similar for milk consumption. So the per capita consumption in 2013 for the entire world on average was 90 kilograms per year per person. Keep in mind the production on average is 116 liters or kilograms per person. But split up on the continents, you can see that Asia only consumes 60 kilograms of milk per year per person, compared to 248 kilograms of milk per person per year for North America on average. Okay, so people around the entire world consume a lot of eggs and dairy. But there are many problems with the egg and dairy industry. Let's start with animal welfare. This is probably the most horrific industry in regards of animal welfare you can imagine. For example, to produce eggs you need chicken, and these chickens, if they are male, they cannot lay any eggs. So they literally get shredded alive. I think you've probably heard of it, and if you haven't seen it, if your stomach can handle it, you can watch it here on YouTube. Just Google for chick shredder or something. It's really horrible. It's literally a conveyor belt right into a shredder, shredding these chicks alive because they are male and they don't give eggs. So that is quite horrible just in its own. Another very simple and obvious fact that is often overlooked and still a revelation for so many people for whatever reason, is that cows don't produce milk for fun. They are mammals and they produce milk right after giving birth to feed and grow their offspring, their calves. So this means two things for the milk and dairy industry. One, that these cows are basically pregnant all the time and need to give birth very regularly to produce milk all the time. And secondly, that the calves will not be allowed to drink that milk because the industry wants to get that milk. So in practice, it looks like this. The female cows are artificially inseminated, or raped, if you want to call it that, every year. They then become pregnant, give birth to a calf, and the calf is taken away from the mother a couple of days after birth. But even in these couple of days, the calf is not allowed to drink the milk, so the calves get these nose rings with spikes on them. So every time it wants to drink from the udder of the mother cow, it pokes the mother, and the mother runs away and basically doesn't let the calf drink. That is just so fucked up and horrific. Whatever. And then after the calf is taken away and usually slaughtered right away, the mother can then produce milk for about a year before she starts producing less and less milk, and she is then allowed a dry-off period of 2 months. How very generous of this great industry. Well, after that, she's of course artificially inseminated again, basically raped again, as every year, to become pregnant again and to produce the milk again and start the cycle all over every year. Until she no longer produces enough milk, then she is slaughtered pretty much right away, and that's it. Great life. So I could go on forever with these animal welfare issues in the egg, milk and dairy industry, and I would argue it's probably even worse in terms of animal welfare than the meat industry, because the animals producing eggs and dairy usually live much longer than the animals produced just for their meat, and that means they have to suffer these horrible living conditions for much longer, and they are not only just raised and fed up to grow fat and big, they are actually used as these production machines day in and day out for years. It's just horrific. But let's not stop there. There are more environmental issues as well. For example, you need around 1,000 liters of water to produce just 1 liter of milk. One dairy cow eats about 45 kilograms of feed every day and is only producing 36 liters of milk, or 8 gallons per day. 9% of the available US cropland is used just to grow crops to feed these dairy cows. That is around 34 million acres. One farm of around 2,500 dairy cows produces as much waste and runoff as a city of 411,000 people. But this waste is not treated at all. It's largely untreated and just disposed right into the rivers and the environment. But we're still not done. There are also health issues. So let's pick a couple examples. Dairy is the main source of saturated fats in our modern Western diets. Milk does absolutely not build any strong bones, in the contrary. And dairy is also linked to many types of cancers. Another very important fact about antibiotic resistance, which is a big problem, is that 80% of the antibiotics sold in the US are sold to animal agriculture and given to these animals prematurely for prevention instead of given to humans. This, of course, is a massive problem for antibiotic resistance. So now let's talk business. The global egg market had a size of $213 billion in 2020 with a compound annual growth rate of just around 7%. Now that's not a lot, but it's still growth overall. The global dairy market, on the other hand, had a size of $720 billion in 2019, expected to grow to $1 trillion in just 3 years in 2024. That is a huge market. It's almost the size of the global meat market. The organic dairy products, for example, only accounted for $20 billion of those, and the bulk of these products is cow milk, so it accounts for over 90% by weight of all the dairy products. So what's the state of the industry overall? Spoiler alert, it's pretty shit already. These projections that I showed you for growth of the market of 7% per year and increasing market size and so on, they are published by very traditional, conventional market research firms. But I believe they have absolutely no clue about the groundbreaking shift in production techniques and products that will destroy this entire shit show of an industry for good. Dean Foods, for example, America's biggest milk producer, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in November of 2019. Shortly thereafter, the Borden Dairy Company, one of the oldest and largest milk producers in the US, also filed for bankruptcy. So that's 2 of the biggest milk producers in the US gone with just a couple of months. In addition to that, in 2019, 2,700 family farms went out of business. That's a total of 94,000 of these smaller farms that went out of business since 1992. Overall, the US milk consumption has dropped by 6% since 2015, and the entire industry is just propped up by government subsidies, because milk almost sells at a loss. You can regularly see milk and dairy farmers protesting these dumping prices by actually just dumping their milk in the streets. But guess what didn't drop? The consumption of plant-based milks. Plant-based milk sales accounted for $1.9 billion in 2019. And this small market is expected to grow at an annual growth rate of 15% to almost $40 billion in 2027. That is more than a doubling in just 6 years. And guess why? It's actually not because of dietary requirements for most consumers. Most people buy plant-based milks because they view it as a more healthy, more sustainable alternative to conventional milk. And kudos to them, that's actually a very correct observation. So what about the big disruption this time? Plant-based milks are certainly great, but they have a long way to go in China or India, where the real consumption happens, and where these products are not yet as widely available as they are in the US or here in Europe. But even leaving plant-based milks aside entirely, the conventional dairy industry is facing complete annihilation by a far deeper reaching disruption than just soy milk. I'm talking, of course, about fermentation. So what exactly is fermentation? Fermentation is the engineering of microbes to produce specific organic molecules on demand, like proteins, fats, or sugars, for example. Animals do it all the time. They break down nutrients in plants and turn them into essential proteins and fats. However, the nutrient conversion efficiency of most animals is only about 4%, so it's ridiculously bad. There are 3 categories of fermentation, basically. You have traditional fermentation, biomass fermentation, and precision fermentation. Traditional fermentation is the changing of food through microbial anaerobic digestion. That happens in beer and wine production, for example, to get the alcohol, but also in yogurt and cheese. It basically improves the function and flavor of ingredients and is used for hundreds of years already, for example in the production of tempeh. Biomass fermentation uses the high protein content and rapid growth of microorganisms to efficiently make large amounts of protein-rich food. These microorganisms are themselves ingredients in these foods. And for example, Corn, the company, grows filamentous fungi via fermentation to use as the primary ingredient in many of their products. Precision fermentation is where the real magic happens. In precision fermentations, these microorganisms produce functional ingredients. They are basically programmed as tiny production facilities. For example, you can produce insulin for diabetic patients or rennet for cheese production. It's used to produce specific proteins, enzymes, flavor molecules, vitamins, pigments, and fats, among others. Fermentation basically can produce a lot of protein very fast, very cheap, and very healthy. Microorganisms double in hours compared to animals who take months or even years. The protein content of these microorganisms is very high, with more than 50% of the dry mass compared to 25% for conventional beef. These proteins can mimic animal products without the cholesterol, the antibiotics, and the hormones. They massively decrease the land and water use, they produce almost no waste, they have lower greenhouse gas emissions, and make the entire food system much more sustainable. I also want to add here that fermentation has a couple of advantages over culturing meat, which is why I believe that the egg, milk, and dairy industry will be disrupted much sooner and much more harshly than the meat industry. The process of fermentation is very well understood, and we have literally done it for millennia already. These products don't require a tissue structure, so no scaffolds and so on are necessary. And customers are already familiar with alternatives to milk, so they use plant-based milk for years now, and they are probably more open to try an alternative milk than an alternative to meat, which they have never eaten an alternative to really. So if the disruption is coming so fast, what does it look like now? There are currently 51 companies in fermentation of alternative proteins. Most of them have been founded in just the past 5 years. Impossible Foods, for example, produce heme, the blood for their plant-based burgers, using fermentation methods. Perfect Day sells animal-free ice cream using fermented whey protein under their Brave Robot brand. And this ice cream is available in stores already for similar prices to conventional ice cream. There are more examples for gelatin, seafood, pet food, but also many B2B products like fats, oils, and of course protein. This technology is already proven. It works and it is available for consumers today. The think tank Rethink X published their report Food and Agriculture in 2030, which is really an eye-opening report, which I will discuss in future videos in more depth. But here are some highlights from that report on the egg and dairy industry. They estimate that precision fermentation will create 700,000 jobs in the US alone by 2030. The cost of these modern foods, so for example fermentation-derived dairy products, will be at least 50% cheaper than conventional products. And the conventional dairy industry is already in a death spiral by then, with revenues reduced by 50% by 2030 and nearly 90% by 2035. That's an entire industry wiped out within just a decade. The dairy industry will also collapse much faster than the meat industry for the reasons discussed earlier. In this image you can see the reduction in dairy markets in 2030. So conventional dairy ingredients will be reduced by 90% and conventional dairy end products by 85%. So to summarize, the egg and dairy industry is an almost $1 trillion market right now that produces a metric shit ton of milk and eggs every year. There are many problems with animal welfare, with ecological but also economic sustainability of that sector that sells at ridiculously low prices that are barely profitable. Fermentation, on the other hand, is a very well established method that has a renaissance right now like never before, with many startups and huge investments in that space. And the promise of fermentation is delivering better alternative protein options. But it's actually not just a promise anymore. There are many companies and products that are already on the market at competitive prices today. It's just a matter of scaling and time before it takes over entirely. These fermentation-derived products will take over the entire conventional dairy market from ingredients to end products. And they will drastically lower the costs of production, have reduced impacts on land, water and energy demand, have higher health and safety standards. We live in very exciting times right now. And I personally cannot wait to see the animal agriculture industry dwindle into absolute oblivion. It's gonna be a death by 1,000 cuts, but it's not gonna take very long. This currently multi-trillion-dollar market for animal products relies on horrible factory farms and archaic methods of production. And the new world that awaits us promises to be a much cleaner, safer, sustainable, and above all, more humane world for all. And that is precisely the mission of this channel as well. Improving the lives of all conscious creatures. So if you want to stay up to date on the alternative protein space, the science, the products, but also the investment opportunities, stick around because that's exactly what we are going to talk about on this channel. Don't forget to like and see you in the next one.